So it's a hazing thing. I have to work all the weekends. Yeah, they're going to need me to host a show on Sunday, too. Yeah, interesting game today. Pretty crappy game on the early game, which is a refreshing difference to see. I'm not seeing a Twitter notification, so I will check our YouTube page to make sure this thing is actually streaming as it should be. Worked on my audio a little bit, have taken all your excellent feedback, which hopefully is creating a more satisfactory audio experience for you. Let's mute the YouTube page before we go too deeply in there. Okay, it appears that we are turned on and doing well. Someone tweet this bad boy at me if you would, so I can retweet it, because our standard Awesemo auto tweet did not go. So of the couple dozen people watching right now, if someone would send this to me in a tweet, so I don't have to show my true ignorant impotence of the internet, and then I can retweet the sucker and we can get this road on the show, as the saying goes. As I mentioned, the Jazz in Orlando in a scintillating contest, again, in the altitude. Orlando, with their second consecutive game in Tecnoctlan in Mexico City there, former seat of the Aztec Empire. And we have to hope that's going well, but nice to have that, sort of more random game being in Mexico, and certainly not a pace-up option going off before the main slate, so that we get to focus on 6 more delicious, juicy NBA contests for this evening. Oh, thank you for the people who were kind enough to send me that link. You are good men and thorough. Hopefully you get that movie reference. So we've got a half dozen games to get into here. I will fire up the YouTube chat so that I may adequately answer your questions. If the people in the premium chat at awesemo.com let us down. Alright, hopefully this is all up and connected well. And let's get in here and get talking now. We've got enough people filing on in. I know it's an NFL Saturday. That's bullshit. They already steal kind of 3 nights a week from me on Thursdays, Mondays, and Sundays. This aggression will not stand, man. But let's get in here and talk about our first game. It's a doozy. I enjoyed this game. The Lakers visiting the Hornets. Basically a pick'em game. Pretty decent pace on this sucker as well. So certainly a game we should have some fair amount of interest in. Start off talking about LeBron James. I like LeBron a lot. He is actually my highest scoring player of the night. If that turns out correct, I'll have gotten it 4 games in a row, although getting the James Harden versus LeBron one was kind of cheating. That was a pretty small slate, but got there with Giannis over Embiid yesterday, and I think LeBron is our guy here. I do slightly prefer him to Russ Westbrook, who I have pretty obviously second, a couple points behind, and I have him a few points behind James Harden in third. So just to start off with frequent question of who I prefer among the studs, that is how I rank them, aside of pricing, sites, correlation, and other things that might sway your opinions. I would be looking to play LeBron before I played Westy, before I played Harden. We obviously still, for the Lakers, we'll talk about the visiting Lake show first. Beasley still out, still no Rondon. Ingram still out. JaVale McGee being questionable is an interesting bit of news. That's a very good question that just came in, which was, does MKG pick up a few minutes to help guard LeBron? I think he does. They have a few guys who do a halfway decent job at it. Marvin Williams does an okay job. Nicholas Batum does an okay job and has a fair bit of experience at it. But even if it's not plan A, due to foul trouble on those other guys, or just things going a little bit sideways, there's definitely a chance that MKG picks up extra minutes because of that. And certainly nothing negative for him there. He'd do a better job than, say, Miles Bridges in a similar bench situation. So I do think of the bench guys you can look at, MKG makes a pretty intriguing one. Even for $300 more, I would prefer him on FanDuel, where you could drop that price, drop that score rather, than on DK, because it is not necessarily the strongest spot in the world. Maybe you get another game out of Nick Batum. Obviously, it's a game, the pace is attractive, but you're just always out there sort of, gunning at those plays and hoping you pick up one of those days where his usage is 20% as opposed to 8%, which happens reasonably frequently. I like Jeremy Lamb a lot. I would much rather play Jeremy Lamb than Nick Batum At least on DK. DraftKings, I think there's $800 differential between those two guys. I think it's $1,300 on FanDuel, and there I'd be fairly nominal. Let me check that sort of the. There's a couple other shooting guards I think I would prefer on FanDuel, but $5,300 on DraftKings for Jeremy Lamb in a good pace spot, in a situation where the Lakers do a pretty poor job at guarding two guards, and he's had just a couple low games recently after being on a really consistent stretch for a while. There was a while he was putting up 35 every game for about 10 consecutive games. He had a couple wonky ones since then, but there was the blowout with the Knicks, and then the game with Detroit where he shot 20-something% from the field. So in general, I find him to be pretty significantly underpriced on DraftKings at $5,300. I have trouble choosing between him and Justin Holiday and Chris Dunn and a couple other plays in that range position that I really enjoy. But his ownership will have come off a little bit after a few less than stellar games, and that isn't due to any real lack of performance on his part. So I like Jeremy Lamb a bit. He would be certainly on DraftKings my favorite member of this team. I don't mind Kemba, but that is a really significant price, obviously. 99 on FanDuel, that's really tough to get there. 93 on DK. I have him projected for about 45 fantasy points. That's a perfectly nice line, and he has shown us a ceiling before, clearly well beyond that. But I do expect the Lakers to do a halfway decent job of making him investigate some of the other options. So I'm a little softer on him and a little firmer, if you will, on Jeremy Lamb or Nick Batum, or even Cody Zeller or Marvin Williams or something like that. Marvin probably the last on that list for him. Cody Zeller obviously coming off what sort of a real ceiling game for Cody Zeller, where he put up a 20-10 game, which is not something you frequently get out of him. The price was already on its way up, but he's not out of play. Still going to be more of a cashy play. If I was going to play Cody Zeller, I would say my largest concern would be the fact that if JaVale McGee doesn't play, maybe you end up in the situation where they run small a lot. And now Cody Zeller, instead of getting 29, 30, 31 minutes, gets 24 minutes because instead of running JaVale McGee and Tyson Chandler at center, they run Tyson Chandler and some combination of LeBron and Kuzma and other guys where they really run small and run a lot. And that's not a death knell for Cody Zeller. Cody Zeller is a surprisingly, I say surprisingly because there's nothing like that fun white athlete sort of bias. I forget what it was. There was an NBA award for a number of years where all the basically all the players voted on. There's a good article on. I can't believe I don't remember the award, but basically all the players or the coaches, maybe just the coaches voted on the best non-athletic basketball player. It was the wonkiest distinction ever, and it was always a white guy. It was always like Kevin Love got the. It's just sort of funny because you hear the bias all the time, and there's the famous Key and Peele sketch where they're describing the various players, and black guy comes up and they're like, he's an animal, he's just an athletic freak, and then like a white guy comes up, they're like, he's cagey, he's cerebral, so it's really funny that Cody Zeller is actually fairly mobile for a man of his size. So it isn't necessarily the death knell, long way around of saying, if they only run a true center on the Lakers for 24 minutes, he could still very possibly play 30 minutes. He's not a center who would just be like, yeah, he can't play in that game, you have to scoop him and get him out of there, he's just too big-ass and slow. But it's possible that they respond by going small themselves. They've shown this team in the past play any number of guys at center, from Marvin to even MKG at center we had for a while earlier this year. So, for that reason, and the fact that just he's not super upside guy, usually Cody Zeller, and he's coming off, big upside game, and that'll swell his popularity. Not a guy to be first targeting in tournaments, but wouldn't inherently see it as wrong per se. As far as the rest of the Lakers go, again, LeBron is my guy tonight. Good in the micro matchups, good in the macro matchups. It is worth pointing out that the Lakers are on the front end of a back-to-back, and the Hornets are on the back end. So we talked about it extensively on yesterday's show, and it factored a fair amount, along with the blowouts, into my appeal of various players yesterday. But the Celtics, the Hornets, the Grizzlies, and the Thunder played yesterday. Only the Lakers play both days of the weekend. So only the Lakers are on the front end, I'm 99% sure. So, that doesn't mean a ton. Luke Walton specifically, and coaches in general, rarely limit minutes on the front end. But it's, sort of a back of the head if this game for some reason started to get out of control. They're a little more likely to pull the plug because it's like, oh, crap, we got another game tomorrow we have to get up for. But yeah, Kuzma, I've been unable to pull the trigger on some number of days in a row. It's another good spot for Kuzma. He's been incredibly consistent. Very small delta, very small standard deviation, really just constantly banging you out. 40, 42, 43, 44, 38, 45, 46, just constantly giving you high 30s to mid 40s for some 10 consecutive games now, and again, that won't continue for the rest of the year. Brandon Ingram coming back will jack that up a little bit, but clearly makes him a very solid cash play, and it's not like playing him in a tournament is wrong. The pace is wonderful here. There's a bonus. He is better in the event that JaVale is out. He's one of a number of guys we can expect to do well. Josh Hart, I was trying to find reasons to play other guys when he was $3,600. Now he's $5,000 on FanDuel, $4,500 on DK. Clearly in play. 6 games isn't the largest slate. Someone we expect to see 30-something minutes. And I like Lonzo, just a pace-up spot, just tournaments for me. Again, sometimes just doesn't shoot the ball for a day and a half, and that limits him a fair amount. But the upside is there, and 5,600 makes sense. No strong take there. Let's go ahead and talk about the Celtics and the Pistons after I check breaking news again real quick. All right. Let's go ahead and move on and keep talking about the Celtics and the Pistons here. I like Kyrie Irving quite a bit. Again, the Celtics on the back end of a back-to-back had to travel between... I was about to get into Aaron Baines. Opinion on Aaron Baines without a minutes limit. It's important to understand what without a minutes limit means when you're discussing Aaron Baines. He's not going to play 30 minutes. His minutes high in the season, I think, is in the range of 23. I currently, and was talking in chat a little while ago, said I have him for 22. But if there was a spot they would run him out oodles and oodles of minutes, this would be it. Again, they played 3 days ago, and they said 14 to 16 minutes. And then they played yesterday and said 12 to 14 minutes. And that seemed odd to me and everyone else because they're like, he played like 15 in the last game. His minutes limit went down. And if I'd have spent more than 3 seconds thinking about it, I think I would have said, oh, they have Detroit. They need to get him out there every second possible tomorrow. I would have said yesterday, against Drummond. So, yeah, that does make some sense. Drummond against Boston for a long time was... one of the Drummond against Boston was a smash spot for a significant period of time. Even when the Boston defense was good, Drummond was going in there for about 6 consecutive trips from about a year ago to about 2 years before that, and averaging some 65 fantasy points. And then Boston changed up the way they were guarding him a little bit. You had the arrival and improvement of Aaron Baines. You had them fronting him a little bit more, and it has just reduced it down to being a meh spot for him. Out of his last 3 times there, he's got 2 okay games in the 40s and 1 that was worse than that. So I still think I prefer having Drummond to Blake Griffin raw points. I right now have Drummond projected for 1 point higher. And Blake obviously, Blake much cheaper on FanDuel and much more expensive on DK. The prices are not very even on him. Drummond on DK at 8,500 would be my favorite of the 4 possible plays there that we could look at. But 9,800 on FanDuel, 6-game slate, not out of play. But I would certainly just raw points prefer Karl Anthony Towns, was almost identical price on FanDuel. But 8,500 on DK, now you're starting to price in to being a little bit more reasonable. Nothing wrong with playing Blake, but again, not an ideal matchup. I think he does score into the 40s. It's Blake, who's been fairly consistent recently, does carry with him an upside, but I think it's fairly unlikely to be reached today. And whenever you're spending 9.5 on a player, you want some shot of banging out a 60, and obviously that's still possible with Blake, and the likelihood of that increased somewhat having Al Horford out, but still a less than average likelihood in this particular spot. Reggie Jackson's fine. Again, they're still constantly limiting him to minutes in the mid to high 20s, even with Ish out. Other people are doing a lot of the ball handling. Just tournaments for me. But is John Lure in play? Only if you're trying to pick guys in a blowout, but no, we wouldn't expect John Lure to get any minutes. If you're going beyond Drummond on DK, I like. Blake, either site I'm just fine with, but more of a tournament play for me. Reggie Jackson, tournament play on either site, that's just fine. My next guy is probably Stan Johnson. I would rather play him than Langston Galloway. I would rather play him than Luke Kennard. I would rather play him than Bruce Brown. But Stan Johnson had several really good games off the bench, was taking just a massive usage in that bench role for quite a while there, where he was, picking up 30-point bench usage, managed to have, a couple 30-point games and a couple 40-point games off the bench. Probably the better situation as far as both his time and his usage goes, and he's back under 4K everywhere, where that price was starting to swell because of his timeout. So like him more on FanDuel, where I can drop him. I messed around with lineups earlier today for a while, and Stan Johnson and LeBron James was not an uncommon pairing for me at small forward. I don't know why this is making so much noise, but I will get back in here and change that up so that stops making that really annoying noise. I suppose I will just lower my volume as well because, well, there's no one else on the show I need to hear. So we'll bang that all the way down. Alright, we'll take care of that again later. But sorry for the pinging, which has been frequently complained about. So the next guy I would play there would be that. After that would be Reggie Bullock, who is probable. I would still rather play Stan, but after that I would play Bullock, who should play and should get back into the starting lineup and should have some appreciable minutes and 3-and-D guy, but I would still prefer him to either the Galloway or Kennard options. We're good for now. We'll come back to it later if we're missing anything. Well, no, I should talk about the Celtics a little bit more there. So, I like Kyrie quite a bit. The matchup micro and macro is slightly above average against the Pistons, but they limited his minutes significantly yesterday, as I'm sure was the plan all along also, so that makes a lot of sense. Marcus Smart is still priced okay on DK. He's going to hold that role in the starting unit. Don't love him, and I suspect his popularity is still a little more than I would like. Jason Tatum, obviously in the midst of a fairly prolonged slump at this point and isn't putting up a lot of games that show a lot of upside. Wasn't terribly good when the Celtics and the Pistons played a couple times earlier this year. No particular reason to pick Tatum in this spot to me, but if you wanted to. And the price on Marcus Morris has come up now to the point where I think he's fine. Having Horford out still makes me have a fair amount of interest in Marcus Morris, but we're starting to price out the upside a little bit. So ideally, trying to look everywhere. Your projected minutes for Robert Williams on FanDuel. Not a lot. I think he still comes in behind Tice much of the time. Now, I can still, in a huge tournament pool, I would rather play Baines. I would rather play Chandler. I would rather play a number of other guys. You can play Tyson Chandler on FanDuel and hope McGee sits, but still not be dead in the water if he doesn't in a fast-paced game where, Tyson Chandler can put up a double-double in 20 minutes. That's certainly something that can occur. So I would rather play those guys over Bob Williams, where I think they're certainly safer. I mean, Aaron Baines is 3,700 on FanDuel. I would rather play Aaron Baines and have a very good chance of seeing 20-plus minutes, a decent chance of maybe even seeing 25. Bob Williams are hoping for 14. And again, I like Bob quite a bit. We talked about him a couple of shows recently. Real fantasy-friendly game, but I'd be surprised if you saw an excess of, say, 14, 15 minutes. So I'd have to be, some triple-digit number of lineups in until Bob made his way into my lineups. Don't hate Hayward either. Like him in this bench role. Not having to share so much usage with Kyrie. I think we're in Detroit, so a good chance this game stays close. So I don't have, an issue with him there. Price is now a little higher on Jaylen Brown than I would like it to be with this team starting to become healthy. Let's move on to an even less appealing game where we're sort of slogging through the middle here. It gets a little better as we get towards the end here, but let's talk about Houston and Memphis. Again, Two teams playing really slow right now. Fairly close spread. We're in Memphis, 2 3-point line moving around for most of the night. Let's go ahead and talk about the Grizzlies first there. Last I checked, Kyle Anderson was questionable. Mike Conley should play. So as far as the Kyle Anderson being questionable thing, he is a very low usage guy. He's somewhere in the 12-13% on the year usage for Kyle Anderson. In the event he's out, most of his minutes would flow to Shelvin Mack. And I would have some interest in that if that news comes in towards lock. Like, if it happened right now, the ownership would normalize, and I wouldn't be really interested in Shelvin Mack after a pretty ridiculous streak earlier this year where I kept being like, yeah, Shelvin Mack keeps being productive. I can't suggest him because he's Shelvin Mack, and I know he's just not that damn good, but he's been good. So, like, it was a real issue for me, and that has come back to where I honestly think it should be. He's not that talented of a basketball player. His time, his usage, everything has fallen off for a while. But if you get Kyle Anderson out here, you're going to get Matt getting more minutes and coming at this team from the wings, which is where I'd want to come now. And it's not hard to imagine a matchup where this isn't an exceptional spot for Gasol running into Capella or Chris Paul and Conley dealing with each other, etc. And you could end up with Shelvin Mack starting and handling the ball and, getting over 20% usage on this team. I think it's more likely you get it out of him than Garrett Temple or Jaren Jackson or JaMychal Green. So there's not a lot to love in this game. But I would really like Shelvin Mack as a value play if we got news shortly before lock that Kyle Anderson was going to be out and he was starting, which is what I think they would do with the starting lineup. Rest of the team, fairly short slate. The DK prices are tolerable on Conley or Gasol, but neither of them have matchups that I particularly enjoy. If Anderson is out, does it benefit any Rockets offensively? Well, it depends whether Gordon is out, who is also questionable, but we'll come to that in a second, but not really. Anderson compares fairly well to Temple, and Conley is a very good defender, and it would be a slight boost, assuming Mack did get the start, for basically the Rockets in general, other than Capella, just because the overall quality of their defense would come down a little bit. And the speed goes up when you take slow-mo out. See what I did there? All right. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan of anyone else here. Jaren Jackson, the minutes have started to become a little dubious. For a while there, it was just, he's going to play as long as he can without getting in foul trouble. In the games he didn't get in foul trouble, you'd get 35 minutes out of him, which is good. He's really good. Right now, today, he's basically as good of a player as JaMychal Green. He's a more talented player. He's a more athletic player. JaMychal Green is a more solid player, doesn't miss as many spots. Doesn't get his team in foul trouble quite as much. So, I mean, it depends how you judge it. But, there's been a couple games recently where Jaren Jackson wasn't in foul trouble and still was profiling for minutes in the mid-20s, and that's a little bit disturbing. So I'm certainly not going to look at him in a tournament lineup as wrong, because he just simply has a 2 fantasy point per minute upside. I mean, he is, at this point in his career, a poor man's Anthony Davis, where he can do everything, but he's not going to pick up assists. He doesn't have Anthony Davis's handles, but he can do steals, he can do blocks, he can do threes, he can do a little bit of everything. But the combination of being concerned with minutes and the increased likelihood of foul trouble when you have, James Harden slashing into the lane at you quite frequently, and a snail space matchup, we're not as bad of a spot as you can get for Jaren Jackson Jr., but it's a bad spot. I still would have him in play if I'm building 150 lineups. I have 4 Jaren Jacksons just because he's him and I'm a huge fan, and I think the upside is still there, but it is one of those going to go wrong 96% of the time, make you really happy the other 4% of the time plays. Marc Gasol is fine, but I really like Steven Adams to answer someone's question a second ago. I'm a huge fan of Steven Adams in this spot, so you're spending up, I think, $1,500 on FanDuel and $1,000 on DraftKings to get to Marc Gasol. So small slate, only 9 centers really in play, or 11. Feel free to play some Marc Gasol. If I'm playing 150, I have 3 or 4, but not a good spot, not a good pace. Historically, not good against Capella, not good against the Rockets. Like, there's just no reason to particularly like it. And that's way more time than they deserved. If Aaron Gordon is out, if Aaron Gordon is in, this is one of the rare times I'll say evens Anderson out. Look at that. Nice job. Really? Did they just hit us with that news right on cue? Good job. Boban minutes. 0 to 24. I'm not certain Boban plays. Obviously, I don't think anyone is. All right, so Slow-Mo is out. You know, it does not change a lot. It is probably a minor downgrade for the other people on the team because whoever replaces him is actually going to take more usage than Slow-Mo did. Slow-Mo is a decent fantasy player, but he's doing steals and blocks and rebounds and other shit to get his points. He's got a usage of low double digits, like 11, 12, 14%. They're going to replace him with, I have no idea, something from Wayne Selden to one of the Brook brothers, if they can even tell them apart, to I think more likely Shelvin Mack. And any of those guys are actually going to command a little higher usage. So it's not an upgrade for anyone else there. It is a nominal upgrade for Eric Gordon if he's playing, and James Harden, and Daniel House and Gerald Green. But you're talking about a 2% upgrade for those guys just because of slightly higher pace for the opposition and slightly lower quality defense. Harden not out of play. I'm gonna load up these here ownership projections so I can spoil them a little bit. I like to tease a couple of them during the day. Again, our ownership projections, they be good. I have to sign in. Don't you know who I am? I always wanted to say that. All right, NBA ownership projections. Let's take a look at what we got here. Yep. That's interesting. Yeah, so we do have LeBron James is the highest of the studs, pretty particularly, which is right. That's where he should be. He is the best of them to me. We have, as far as ownership goes, order James over Westbrook, I presume over Harden, who I don't even see. So credit to us thinking that the field in general, even though Harden just put up a 85er or what have you, is aware that this is not an ideal matchup. And again, if you even want to game log these, you'll get pretty similar between LeBron and Westbrook. But Harden has a fairly muted ceiling against Memphis. So the rest of this team, Capella again is overpriced for me. At 9,100, I am basically both sites rather playing Steven Adams, rather playing Andre Drummond on DraftKings, rather playing Karl Anthony Towns, who's only like $800 more on FanDuel. So, again, 6-game slate. I have no issue with him. I would probably rather play Marc Gasol. So he would be like number 6 on my list of expensive centers, which is the bottom of that list. Just because, again, 8,000, 9,000, I need to have some chance of getting an upside, and the odds of getting 55 out of Capella here are very, very, very low. If Eric Gordon is ruled out, you can add to your sort of GPP player pool guys like Daniel House and Gerald Green, who would be among those who would chop up those minutes that he would distribute, because now you'd be without Gordon, without Ennis. So that does open up some minutes that someone would have to fill. But again, really bad spot, and those guys are spending a lot of time on the court with like Chris Paul and James Harden. So biggest news of Gordon being out is it would be another feather in James Harden's cap. And right now we have James Harden projected at 7%. Especially if you have no Eric Gordon and no Kyle Anderson out there. I would want to be on top of 7%. I would feel good on getting on top of that. So that's what she said. Let's go ahead and move on to another game here. The Bulls visiting the Spurs. These two teams did play earlier this year in Chicago. This is the run back in San Antonio. I can't remember if the Bulls won. The Bulls won, or I'm going to look it up. The Bulls won or lost by a point. I recall it being a one of the many times this year I was like, crap, this San Antonio team is not good, which, again, I've been following basketball for a long time. Pretty infrequent. I look at the Spurs and think, wow, this team is challenged. Where is it? There it is. The Spurs managed to take it down by 1 point on the road. Big news here, of course, is that Zach LaVine is out. I like a lot of the Bulls here. And again, if our ownership is fairly correct, they will be, in my opinion, under-owned versus where they should be. Gordon in. Look at this. The news just flowing in. Thank you very much, all you guys, for helping me with the news. So Zach LaVine is out. This most notably just makes everyone better because Zach LaVine, takes 25 to 30% usage and just takes a butt ton of shots that now must be redistributed. We're leaving Ryan Arcidiacono in the starting lineup next to Chris Dunn, who will eventually supplant him. Probably, I imagine they will do that concurrently. They will keep it like this for the 2 or 3 games. And then, are there any guys in the Bulls you would only play if you're predicting a close game like Levine? Well, Levine isn't playing, so I'm not going to play. I would go with fewer than 1 shares of Zach LaVine if I was building lineups tonight. But the 5 guys we do expect to start, which would be Arcidiacono, Dunn, Holiday, Markkanen, and Wendell Carter, I have some interest in all of these guys, and we'll talk about them all briefly. Arcidiacono is... Okay, I misunderstood the question. Sorry. It's nothing personal. I didn't even realize who said it, man. Back off. You're like some crazy guy in the subway. So Arcidiacono, the price has come down low enough on a short slate that I do think, he can certainly pay that off. And it's worth pointing out that the first of the big Arcidiacono games this year came against the Spurs. And I was happy with myself for being the first guy onto Archie for that game. And I looked at that and said, this is a position where I think Arcidiacono can be good. And now Levine is out, and they're starting him next to Dunn. Now, if they hadn't started him next to Dunn, I'd be a little more wary about this play because Dunn is starting to accrue more minutes. And those minutes come at the price of Arcidiacono. In Mexico City, he only played 23 minutes when Chris Dunn played more there. They were sort of chopping up point guard. Now they're starting next to each other. I think you get still 28 to 30 minutes out of Ryan Arcidiacono, and as pointed out earlier this year, he put up 35 for basically minimum in that last matchup. Now, that was a ceiling game. The steals came, which they always want. The shots came, which they always want. And they went in the basket, which they always want. But I would have some exposure to Arcidiacono, and I don't think a lot of people will. Yeah, he's one of my favorite value plays. I would rather play him certainly than all the Spurs value. So I'm very happy to pivot to him over Patty Mills, Derek White, Bryn Forbes. Now, all those guys are fine too because they're playing the Bulls, and some of the Spurs are obviously going to be good here. It would be pretty weird, although if a team could do it, it would be the Spurs, that they managed to distribute minutes quite so evenly that in a pretty cream dream matchup, the Spurs don't manage to put up a real number against them. Blowout is a potential concern here, so that's possible. You can get a game here where you get 26 minutes and 40 fantasy points out of DeRozan, 28 minutes and 37 fantasy points out of LaMarcus Aldridge, 22 minutes and 28 fantasy points out of Rudy Gay. All those guard guys get 20 to 25, and Bellinelli gets 20. So that's why I'm not over the moon on the Spurs, but there's just not that many guys on the Bulls, and I'm talking about the starters here, and they're all just really, really cheap. So Wendell Carter, probably the least interested I am in the 5 starters for Chicago. 5,200 is still an appealing price for me on DraftKings. He's still power forward eligible, but he's obviously had some real foul trouble issues, and there's a number of guys on this team who can certainly get the job done. Is Shaq Harrison in the back in the rotation? I don't mind Shaq Harrison or Campaign. I would rather play either of them over Blakeney. I am not sure how they handle the backup guard minutes, but both those guys would also play in the quite potential blowout. I would probably play Shaq Harrison over Campaign because of the steals upside he has. He's an absolutely elite steals guy. So I would play Ryan Arcidiacono over either of them. But yeah, if I'm building 150 lineups, I have 5 Shaq Harrisons and 2 Cameron Paynes in there for good time. So I do think that's a fun play. Wendell Carter, again, foul trouble issues, but just is athletic and cheap. And, at $5,200, they want to play him 30 minutes here. But my least favorite of the starters, I actually prefer Bobby Portis to him as well. But regarding the other starters real quick, I really like Lauri Markkanen. I think they want to give him more usage. I think he wants to take more usage, and I think he's going to get more usage. I like Justin Holiday a very good amount also at 5,600, 5,300, just because I project now to get an extra 3.5 shots or so, and that's where he gets his points from. And against the Spurs, not a matchup I'm super worried about, and Sans Levine. I like Justin Holiday fairly, but the price up just isn't that much to get to Lauri Markkanen. On DK, it's $600 to make that move, and he's very much worth $600. So Lauri Markkanen, one of my favorite plays on the day. I really like Lauri Markkanen. I don't think he's out of play in cash. There's obviously a chance for an absolute beatdown here, but They want him to play full minutes and take a lot of shots and work on the offense around him. I like Chris Dunn a lot. It will be interesting to see how frequently he versus Ryan bring the ball up when they are on the court next to each other. They're obviously not going to both play the full 48 minutes, so I think you get the two of them and Shaq Harrison, ideally if the game stayed close, probably taking all those minutes with them playing the 1, the 2, and the 3. But yeah, there's and I like Bobby Portis a fair bit. Him at 4,800 before the last game was one of my favorite plays on FanDuel. He's still cheaper on FanDuel, where he's 53 versus 54 on DraftKings. That's still a little too cheap for him. He does still carry a big upside. Not a great matchup for him, but I still like him quite a bit in a tournament. How many bulls are too many in a DraftKings GPP? I mean, they are cheap enough that, 2 doesn't bother me at all. 3, if you have a spur, would sort of be my answer. So, like, if you have, and sort of Markkanen and Portis have negative correlation. So you don't count Arcidiacono. You just ignore him. He doesn't count as being a bull for the purpose of this conversation. But all the other ones cost 5x. So I don't really hate it if you have 3. But 2, 3 if you have a spur feels about right. So, Dunn, Markkanen, and Holiday with DeRozan, or Dunn, Markkanen, and Holiday with Aldridge. Something in that would make a lot of sense for me. Do I prefer Drummond or Cat for DK Cash? That's pretty close for me. I will slightly prefer Drummond for cash. I'll prefer Towns for tournaments. Towns has a massive upside. Obviously, the matchup with Phoenix. Drummond situation. I will get to some questions in a minute. I want to make sure I get through the games. The Spurs, there's no one here I absolutely love because the combination of their prices are all correct or even a little bit high. And a matchup where they can quite possibly blow the other team out, which makes already sort of sketchy minutes for many of these guys really dicey. They come out early in blowouts. Pop gets you out of there Brad Stevens style, where you can get 24 minutes and to the pine. So, just the fact, I don't know how likely we think. We'll call a significant blowout one where none of the starters play in the fourth quarter. The odds of a significant blowout in this game are like, I'll say 30 to 35%. That makes probably all the expensive plays in this game close to useless, or certainly takes away their ability to slam an upside. And so, for that reason, they're all fine in tournaments, and we expect some of them to be good. But, I have some level of concern. I would rather not super overstack this team unless I'm just stacking this game and building a lineup on the presumption that it stays close. I slightly prefer Derek White to Patty Mills to Bryn Forbes today because of my best guesses at ownership and how I think they play out and how it works in a blowout. But I don't have a strong preference and would rather play Ryan Arcidiacono over all 3. Of the studs, it ends up being a little site dependent. Aldridge has the easiest path to victory here. They really don't have anyone who's going to guard him reasonably well, but he's obviously been bad. But I suppose if I have to play these 3 guys, it's probably Aldridge, Gay, DeRozan. And usually that's the opposite of my order. The last 4 or 5 times we've talked Spurs, I've had DeRozan as my favorite, then Gay, then Aldridge. But in this particular spot, I would actually invert that, taking Zach LaVine out and putting Chris Dunn in the starting lineup significantly improves the outlook for the defense in general, and most specifically against DeMar DeRozan. So for that reason, I'll invert that order and go with Aldridge, Gay, DeRozan. Let's move on to the next game. 2 left to go. Timberwolves and the Suns. So, yeah, I really like basically everyone starting on the Timberwolves in tournaments, certainly. Let's start with the chalk of the day being Dario Saric. Dario Saric is especially good here because they're playing the Suns and because we've removed the uncertainty about his minutes. But he played 31 minutes each of the last 2 games. He's not going to play 44 minutes now. I've heard 7 people today and read people like, oh my God, with Taj out, Sarge is going to get so many minutes. I'm not sure he gets an extra minute. He literally played 31 minutes each of the last 2 games. I have him projected for 32 minutes. And the game could blow out, and then he doesn't even get that. So he's good because there was always this uncertainty is Taj going to get going? And, Taj used to be a Bull, and Thibodeau's in love with him, so maybe this is the game we go back to seeing, Taj get 26 and Sarge get 22. And that was always sort of in the back of your head, so it was really difficult, especially on full slates, to take Dario Saric because of the big chance of that uncertainty. So I'm certainly a fan of Dario Saric. He's just a good play based on the fact that now we should expect him to get 30 minutes plus, and he's in a stellar matchup, and he's cheap. So yeah, he's good. He's cash. He's chalk. He's good chalk. But, he's only slightly better than he would have been if Taj Gibson wasn't out, because last couple games he was playing 30 minutes anyway and was coming off the bench. He would have been a much better tournament play in the event that Taj Gibson was in. Bob Covington's price has finally come down to a very usable level. I obviously like him a ton. He is technically designated as probable, so you'll want to ensure that he is in, but especially at that DK price of 5,500. News on the Lakers, just that they're going to start the lineup we expected them to. But I like Bob Covington quite a bit on DK. The mark of Kane there will keep his price down a little bit. Certainly Wiggins makes sense in tournaments. Basically all these guys are at least vaguely playable in tournaments. I would probably rather play Teague over Wiggins in tournaments. We haven't seen a big game out of Teague in a while, but he does crank up a few of those once a year. He should play 32, 34 minutes if this matchup stays close, and he is a guy who can pick up 7, 8 steals. He's a guy who can, you get really dumb Jeff Teague games every once in a while. Apologies. And yeah, Towns, obviously, I have projected just a little bit behind Harden there. This is obviously a super smash bod. Butler out of town, all the indicators we're looking at. Yeah, big fan of Karl Anthony Towns. Not sure there's a ton to add there after that. Will be fairly chalky among the high price centers, but he should be. And don't sleep on Derrick Rose, especially on FanDuel. Both Rose and Wiggins priced especially well. Are we on Holiday and Batum or Archie and Gay? I would rather play probably Holiday and Batum. And the other thing is you can certainly, build a lineup based on this game blowing out. And then the two guys I would like most off the bench would be Gorgie Jang, who will get his backup minutes, and then probably Tyus Jones. You could do Tolliver too, but you want to get some of those guys who would get, their first shift backup role in the first half and then maybe play the whole fourth quarter if they're massively, massively up. But again, this is a game in Phoenix, and Tibbs, not like Popovich, does not pull his starters out at the first sign of a blowout. Quite the obvious. Hart or Batum at the same price. Hart's a much better cash play. Batum is much better tournament play. That's pretty straightforward. One game left to go. The Clippers and the Thunder. Okay, let's talk about the home team first. That is the Thunder. Russ Westbrook, again, has all the ceiling in the world. It is Russell Westbrook. His shooting has been very sketchy recently from the field. From the line, certainly concerning, but I don't think there's anything mechanically wrong. While I do think he's in his decline, I think he's at the beginning of his decline, and on any given night still has the possibility to put up Jan 100 fantasy points at any given time. This not the greatest matchup for him to do this in against the Clippers, against these particular guards. They have a number of bodies to throw at him. Everything from Patrick Beverley to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a perfectly tolerable defender, to Avery Bradley, etc., etc. So one of a few reasons that I'm not super onto Russ, but obviously a player, if you're building a lot of lineups, you have to get some exposure to. So, that's where it starts. I'm not playing any of the two guards other than Dennis Schroeder. Dennis Schroeder makes some sense in the tournament. The emergence of Schroeder makes Diallo and Ferguson and Abrines and that whole crew of not good basketball players even less playable than they were before. The price on Jeremy Grant is pretty noticeable at $3,900 on DK. I think he's just fine. It's more of a cash punt level, but something certainly can be done there. It's another guy I'd have some exposure to. Makes a pretty nice Dario Saric pivot on DK if you are trying to go somewhere else. I love Steven Adams. It's a great spot for him. They don't have anyone outside of possibly Boban, which my biggest reason to think you're going to get some exposure is that Adams is, again, very good micro matchup against, say, Gortat, who I expect to at least get the start. Against the Clippers in general. They played twice earlier this year. Steven Adams scored into the 40s both games. And I have him projected for 39 today, which obviously makes me a pretty big fan of him at $6,900 and $6,500. So those are numbers where I'm certainly very interested in Steven Adams. Points per dollar is my favorite center on the day. We like Paul George. He's obviously done a little better since Westbrook came back than we expected, but you know, a little more cashy than tournamenty for me when his price is at, you know, 92 and 97. But I would not dissuade anyone from taking Paul George in any context. Dennis Schroeder definitely makes sense in tournaments for me, and I always, if I'm building 100 or more lineups, would have some issue in Nerlens Noel. Just all you need is, you know, Steven Adams foul trouble, and he's still just so cheap, and one game out of whatever, you get something really, really stupid out of him. So just a great fantasy point per minute player there. So I'm a bit of a Nerlens Noel stan. As far as I would rather play Patrick Beverley than Avery Bradley for expected ownership, and just because I like the upside a little bit more there. If I was looking at one of those bargain guards there, I don't mind Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is going to start, going to play. Has a locked-in role with this team. Hasn't shown a ton of upside. More of a cash play, really. Probably going to give you 25 for your 5,000, and certainly, you know, many of the other guard options have some form of uncertainty or another. I like both the forwards on this team, even in a fairly difficult matchup. I think I prefer Gallinari to Tobias Harris by just a hair. Obviously, Gallo can get a little bit more of Paul George pressure, but I do think this is a situation that benefits him a little bit more. And not impossible, we see more Gallo at the 5 time here, and I just think I slightly prefer that. But worth pointing out that, you know, Toby did have a 50-plus fantasy point game earlier this year, and I would think the default guarding is going to be more of Paul George on Gallinari and a little bit more of Jeremy Grant on Gallinari. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out, but I do think for ownership, among other things, I do slightly prefer Gallinari amongst those guys. I don't know what the hell's wrong with Montrezl Harrell. He's my guy, but minutes are down. Completely forgot how to shoot his free throws. Production is down. I mean, he was obviously doing better than certainly I and I think almost anyone expected earlier this year. And again, I drafted him on every season-long team I'm in. Said I expected him to start at center for this team before too long. But it has been a rough go for Montrezl for a little while there. Let's go ahead and hit let's get into some QQ here. Do you like Pat Beverly or Archie Diacono more raw points? I like Archie Diacono a lot more. I have Archie Diacono for like 8 more raw points. Harrell can't score without lose dimes. It's relevant. I would think it would be almost even just based on him just having a little more offensive opportunity. But Markkanen or Hayward for cash is Markkanen for me, not close. I have him by about 5 points. Hart or Batum, same price. Again, that's very clearly Hart, Cash, Batum tournaments. Russ, George, and Adams too much in one GPP lineup. I think you need to run it back with Tobias Harris or a Gallinari on the other side. But no, that can happen. I mean, it's not ideal, but you can get 60 out of Russ, 50 out of Paul George, and 40 out of... I mean, I'm pretty sure you basically got those numbers. One of them. Let me pull up the game logs for earlier this year to take it out of the realm of the hypothetical and into this is a thing that can happen. The first game, the Clippers beat them up pretty good, and basically no one on the Thunder was very good, but I believe they've played twice. Yeah, they played twice. The second time, the Thunder at home won by 18, and you got 42.5 out of Steven Adams, 58 out of Paul George, and 56 out of Russ. So that seems like a possibility. We must be getting some news as I am getting many, many messages. He was in the harbor killing many men. Gay or Warren raw points? I mean, I would play Warren between those two guys right now. Obviously, there's the entire conversation with Devin Booker. So I obviously just didn't talk about the Suns very much there as I sort of skipped over them. Shout out Trevor Ariza, who did me good several times this year, including in his last game. We talked about the Timberwolves, but I sort of skipped over talking about the Suns. So Josh Jackson will play. Devin Booker is probable. I expect Devin Booker to play. Devin Booker makes a lot of sense on FanDuel. $6,900 or $7,900 rather on FanDuel and $8K flat on DK. There's concern the minutes will be limited. We're not certain that he's going to play, but I do expect him to give it a go here. it basically just messes up a lot of the team. TJ Warren should see some reduced ownership now. DeAnthony Melton's price is way up, and I do expect him to start next to them. I think they start Melton, Booker, Bridges, Warren, Ayton. So I still expect Melton to start. I don't think there's any reason to completely expurgate him from a tournament player pool, but the combination of us seeing last game that he will come out if things aren't going well, plus the possibility that Booker, even when Melton is in, will handle the ball more, plus the possibility they'll deploy some lineups with Booker at the point and Melton with his ass on the bench. I'd have 5 DeAnthony Meltons and 150, but the ownership is going to fall off really significantly, and he is a guy through steals and banging some threes who can get there for you. So I wouldn't want to have none, but I do think it's appropriate to be disincentivized. But yeah, if you think Booker is back, all these guys are going to be a little too expensive. Having accrued salaries of not having Devin Booker out there with his 30% usage, taking 20 shots, and doing a lot with the ball. So McCall Bridges on DK, they've already confirmed he'll keep starting, 3,700. That's fine. Not in love with it, but that's fine. TJ Warren, especially FanDuel price is still a little too cheap. That's fine, but it's safe to say fairly low on the Suns as an organization, both in the long term and this evening. All right, they will start. The Pistons are starting Kennard and Bullock. Interesting. They're getting a little spicy with their lives there. So Jackson, Kennard, Bullock, Griffin, Drummond starting. I like Stan even a little bit more. The Stanimal. Get in there. Looking at some more best plays at shooting guard on FanDuel and a GPP. Justin Holiday and Andrew Wiggins. Kemba and Cash viable. Yes, I don't think it's ideal. I think if I built my best lineup on either site for Cash, I don't think either one would have Kemba in it. But it's not horrifically off. You're shocked if he doesn't give you 40. So I think it's just fine. Just sort of did the Booker spiel. Yeah, Booker himself, I think is a really compelling tournament play. I think you get him. He's great on FanDuel in tournaments, as we just mentioned. The price is a little lower than it should be, and there's a real upside there. But I'm a believer in this improved Timberwolves defense. Covington I expect to play, and he's going to do some of the guarding up on Booker. There's just a lot of ways it goes badly. So I can't play him in Cash. I don't think it's a great matchup for him. He's going to be a little bit rusty. But I think it's a very strong tournament play. Prefer Harden or LeBron on FanDuel. LeBron by a significant amount. Gay or Warren raw points. I'm still going to stick with Warren barely. But there's a lot of moving pieces in both those guys. DK, Mack, or Beverly. Right now I would go with Pat Beverly. Keep your eyes out and be ready to move to Mack in the event we get news. Not much Suns talk. Yeah, I completely forgot about the team for a minute there, so thanks for the cover. Can you talk about Lamb and Grant in terms of their projected ownerships? That sounds to me like someone who... All right. So we currently have Jeremy Lamb. I will refresh to make sure that I have not missed an update. But as of that old update, projected as the second highest owned player on DraftKings. And we have Jeremy Grant as the fourth. I would rather suck down the Lamb chalk than the Grant chalk, just because I do think the upside, the matchup are just a little more advantageous. I don't mind Jeremy Grant. He's probably going to play 30 minutes. He's probably going to give you 20 to 25 fantasy points, and there is an upside there for yon $3,900. I would be more inclined at those ownership projections to play Lamb than to play Grant. And Grant, a guy whose number I called a number of times this year, but you got to find better spots where he's not quite so chalky. Just checking out some of these other ownership numbers before I move on. Nice and low on Steven Adams. We have Steven Adams as our number 3 center, so I'm a pretty big fan of that. Excuse me, we have Steven Adams as our number 4 center right now. He's a point under Zeller, and then Townsend Drummond. You might expect those two. This has JaVale McGee at 5th on that list at 19% ownership. I would be very surprised if you saw that, even if we got confirmed in, which I don't think we have. Handling some more questions, checking the premium chat first, but about to head over. Brooks Brothers Day, who's angrier, Dylan or Marshawn? Marshawn's more angry because you spelled his name wrong, but if I had to play one of them right now, I'd play Dylan Brooks, I think. You have a lot of DeRozan and LMA in your crunch. Will they be low-owned enough to give me leverage if it smashes or stays close? Right, so that's a good question, because that's really the way you have to think about it is, I'm playing these guys who carry with them some significant risk, that being that the Bulls game isn't close or that they're bad. If you're putting them both in there, is it worth the numbers? And, for the object example, I'll give you the numbers we have right now. We have DeMar DeRozan at 14% and LaMarcus Aldridge at 11%. So, yes, I think that is enough if you get a large piece of that game and you get, if you're playing both of them and you get 55 and 45, or you're playing one of them and that's the guy who puts up 60, that, yes, I do think they are worth the prices at that level of ownership. There's that number for everyone where they're worth their price at their level of ownership. And it's intriguing for some guys. James Harden, I think had it 7% before. I think he's worth more than 7%. And again, when you say I'm going to play 7% James Harden, you aren't just saying I'm going to play 7% James Harden. You are casting a vote against LeBron James and Russell Westbrook. So you're saying, I think James Harden can be the highest scoring play on the night, which happens two ways, him being exceptional or the other guy's not. So you're certainly happy if James Harden goes up and puts up an unlikely 75 in a tough matchup with Memphis. But you're also just fine if James Harden goes out and puts up 59 and LeBron gets 56 and Russell Westbrook gets 51. No, I was saying play Marshall. Did I say play Dillon? I meant play Marshawn. Dillon Brooks is current. I don't think Dillon Brooks is with the team. I said play Marshawn. He's angrier. Did I mess that up? I would not play either Brooks. I don't think they're in play, so I was sort of dismissing the question, but I would play the one who is currently. I don't think. I will double check. I'm not gonna be honest. I don't look at the Brooks guys a lot. Ever since the beginning of the year where they decided to take all the young players out of their rotation and load up on Garrett Temple, it hasn't been really relevant, unfortunately. Archie Diacono and Walker, or Kyrie and Grant. I probably prefer the first one for cash, barely. Second one for tournaments, but very close. Yeah, I think Dillon is out. Have an uncomfortable amount of exposure to the Bulls. Yep. Yeah, I like the Bulls tonight. I certainly like having at least a share in every lineup. It's hard to imagine Sans Levine, one of these other guys, isn't great, but it's a little dicey. McGee warming up and expected to play. Oh, okay, I thought you were saying I got it wrong. I thought I would say, between the two I would play Marshawn, and then you're like, Dillon's out. And I'm like, yeah, that's why I said play Marshawn. But anyway, McGee warming up and expected to play. Okay, so, if you had any Tyson Chandler, probably turn it into Aaron Baines there, who, again, is just fine in this spot. And is the most easy, immediate pivot. If you were looking to do such a thing. I'm going to go into full sort of scanning the news mode here. Baines is starting, which, again, not surprising whatsoever. Looking to see if there's anything we have missed. Doesn't appear to be. Kyrie and Adams or Towns and Hayward? Kyrie and Adams for me. We are coming down to it, ladies and gentlemen. You like my Pikachu card? Thanks. I got a surfing one. I have some of the Alolan, like tropical Pokemon things over there. I try to collect. I owned a game store for about a dozen years, so my basement is a sundry of all sorts of long unused and unloved gaming products. Not seeing anything, and we are locked. Kyrie and Dunn or DDR and Teague. Kyrie and Dunn, I think, is slightly better in cash between those two. DDR and Teague is a pretty sexy tournament play. So we are done, ladies and gentlemen. Let me go ahead and play what is apparently America's favorite game. Research pending on that statement. And take a look at some ownerships before we shuffle off for the evening. Let's see, on DK, 200K being the largest tournament I see. Josh Jackson, thoughts? I don't like him. I generally don't like him, and now it's not the best matchup. This is a Timberwolves defense. I think it's fairly legit. And possibly Devin Booker is back. And worst of all, he's Josh Jackson. So for those reasons, I would be dubious to pay a mid-5s price there. Let's see. Drummond, 28. Jeremy Lamb, 50. 50%. William Wallace has the strength of 50 men. Let's go ahead and look at the overall ownerships. See what we got. All right, here we go. Again, number 1, Jeremy Lamb, 50. Even 50% for Jeremy Lamb, a little higher than we had him projected, but about right. Let's see, other guys on the early slate. LeBron James, 39.6. Well done. You have correctly diagnosed the situation. Andre Drummond, 28. That feels about right. Lonzo Ball, 20. That feels about right. Nick Batum, about 20. Okay, so that's some Hornets up here at the top. Kuzma, 17.5. Zeller, 15. Kyrie, 15. Josh Hart, 14. Reggie, 12.5. Kemba, 12. Blake, 11. Tyson Chandler, 7.39. I'd feel pretty good about 7.4% Chandler. Tice, 6.3. That's about where it should be. Marcus Morris, 6. That's about where it should be. Rozier, 6. Marvin Williams, 4.8. Jason Tatum, 4 flat. Aaron Baines, 3.8. Like I really would like to get some Aaron. JaVale McGee, 3%. Daddy likes that quite a bit. Love me getting some questionable guys who eventually play. Smart, 2.7. Luke Kennard, 2.3. Reggie Bullock, 1.77. Daddy likes that quite a bit. Langston Galloway, 1.76. 1/100% less than Reggie Bullock. Gordon Hayward, 1.71. I like that quite a lot. There's no reason you can't randomly pick up the 40 burger. 1.7% for Hayward is a very, very good price. I like that quite a bit. KCP, 1.7. Jalen, 1.6. Stanley Johnson, 1.3. Tony Parker, 1 flat. Bob Williams, 0.94. Might not play, but I like him. Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, 0.87. I like that. Malik Monk, 0.81. Frank Kaminsky, 0.48. Jose Calderon, 0.38. Miles Bridges, 0.3. Bruce Brown, 0.25. Guillermo Hernan Gomez, 0.17. John Lure, 0.13. That must include that guy in chat. Mo Wagner, 0.09. Semi Ojale, 0.08. Semi is never the answer. Semi, you have disgraced yourself and you must be punished. Jonathan Williams, 0.03. Zaza, 0.02. Sviatoslav Mikhailuk, that's V for those of you who don't know him, 0.02. Michael Beasley, 0.02. Congratulations, you played yourself. Honorable mention, Al Horford, 0.01. You, sir, also played yourself. I will be back again tomorrow, all by my lonesome, for your edification, your enjoyment, your viewing pleasure. I see a couple other questions coming in, but I will handle those via the chat utility itself. Again, if you're not a member of awesemo.com, what the hell are you waiting for? That will be all for today. I am Fast Eddie Fear. Best of luck in your contest tonight. Please tweet me all your winnings or your hate tweets when it goes badly.